Welcome to the PlayNation Podcast, Episode 6. I am one of your hosts, Joe Quinn, and I am alongside the king of PlayStation, Magic Micah Magruder. How are you today, Micah?
I am great. Magic Micah, what a great reminder of one of my old handles on Twitter. I appreciate that.
I love that
great
nickname. It's one of my favorite nicknames, Magic Micah.
Yeah, I might go to that simply because of the fact that right now I don't even know what the heck I put on Twitter. I think it's just Micah. But yeah, I'm doing great. Got a little bit of a head start on my Saturday routine by getting some things done, some returns to Amazon. Kids later today have a birthday party. It's going to be Zoom virtual. It's going to be so cute. It's going to be Among Us. So, I'm kind of looking forward to this Saturday. And plus, we have the podcast right now, episode 6.
Virtual birthday party. That's very 2021. That's very cool. I like that a lot. And by the way, this has been a very exciting week for me individually. It's also been a very exciting week for us sort of as a team, as the PlayNation podcast, right? So just to get this out there individually, look, I just want to announce it over New Year's Eve. Look, I got married. I'm officially a married man, right? So I am betrothed to my wife now. But we did it over New Year's Eve. It was a very spontaneous and romantic wedding, right? So Micah, obviously fantastic news on my end.
Yeah, definitely. Congratulations. I mean, you know what? It's one of those things that like I know where you're coming from and where Erica's coming from, that it would have been great to be able to do the whole to-do, but now you can do the whole to-do without having to do all the paperwork. So it's going to be great.
We took control, and we're not going to let this dang virus dictate our lives. And it was one of those things where we didn't want to wait to be married. We didn't want to have our wedding delayed, right? We wanted to make sure that the wedding was exactly what we wanted it to be. So we, like I said, we took control, and we just sort of decided, like I said, very spontaneous and romantically to get married. So very exciting stuff. So like I said, married man, that's exciting. And then secondly, look, we're actually going more public with this podcast now. We're getting more listeners. This has been a very exciting week for the podcast itself, because we threw it out there that the podcast is, it's exciting and it's much more public now. And I think it's going to generate more listens. I think it's going to generate more listeners. So very exciting stuff for us as a team as well.
Yeah, definitely. And one of the great things that before we even announced it to friends and family earlier in this week, this great podcast aggregator, secondplayer.net, they gave us a shout out listening to episode 5. And that definitely got us a big boost. So it's great to be able to see that, other content creators consuming our content and us trying to do the same thing back to be able to consume their content, simply because of the fact that I want to be able to learn about other podcasts out there too, or other content creators trying to do things. So it's really great to be able to see that, you keep saying it, a rising tide lifts all boats,
Mm-hmm.
So it's very great to be able to see that helpful people out there just trying to lift other people up, especially the small timers like us at this time.
Yeah, it's exciting to get your first piece of positive press. It's exciting to have that moment where, and by the way, shout out to secondplayer.net for giving us a little shout there. Rising tide lifts all boats, as we always say, right? So, but yeah, it's really cool to sort of start getting noticed and to start getting sort of that recognition, right? Obviously, look, shout out to the nation, right? The PlayNation right out there listening to us right now. You're the real heroes. But it's just cool to sort of get that momentum and sort of to get that, to sort of get that feeling behind you where, all of a sudden it's like, wow, this is really coming together.
Yeah, I agree. It's it gives all that, those feelings of inadequacy that I have deep down in my heart, it just erases them. And I'm kidding, of course. I mean, we started off this podcast as a reason for fun, and it's continued to be fun 6 episodes in.
We want to lift hearts. That's what we want to do, right? Exactly. So in other words, we want to take your heart. We want to lift it up to its highest level. By the way, episode 6, this is 600% more episodes at this point, right? So we are, I would even say, overwhelming with 600% more episodes. But let's start getting into the topics of today, right? So episode 6, what are we going to be talking about? Well, we're going to be talking about 3 different things, right? So topic 1 is going to be our most anticipated games of 2021. So we are forward thinking. We are looking with our eyes just gazing towards the future. 2021, what games are coming? What are we most excited about? That's topic 1. Topic 2 is going to be an interesting story about actually the last gen PS4 Pro, and PS4 Pro being discontinued in Japan. What does that mean for PS4 as sort of a console and how it's going to move forward? And topic 3 is going to be a little bit of a lighter topic. I'm really looking forward to this. It's going to be nostalgia, right? We're going to talk about, are games as good as they used to be, or is that just our imagination, right? So in other words, are games better now, or were they better in the past, right? So those are going to be our 3 topics. Micah, do you have anything prior to hopping right into topic 1 here?
No, let's do it.
Let's just get right into it. Topic 1, most anticipated games of 2021. As we're existing through the first week of 2021, it would be foolish not to be looking into the eye of the storm and asking ourselves, what is going to spin out of this calamity? With our focus towards the new year that we currently exist in, we must raise the question, what is our most anticipated games of 2021? So, Micah, I put together 3 games for my particular list, most anticipated 2021. You put together 3 games as well.
That's correct.
So why don't we do this? Why don't we go in reverse order, right? And I don't know if you have it in sort of like, this is my actual most anticipated, or if it's in no particular order. But for me, I'm going to go backwards from 3, and I'm going to say, I'm going to save the best for last. And my most anticipated game, I will go off last. Does that sound good to you?
That sounds good.
So, Michael, why don't you start us off with your 3rd game, right? So why don't I'll throw it over to you. What is your 3rd most anticipated game of 2021?
So I actually have a list of maybe 10 to 15 games I'm really looking forward to, and knowing whether or not they'll actually come out. But having to reduce it to 3, that's fine. I mean, we're a podcast. We can't go on forever, or we could. But I did put it in reverse order. So I put Resident Evil Village as number 3. And I'm not a big Resident Evil fan. As a matter of fact, I tried playing Resident Evil 7, got a little bit into it, and then went back to some of the other games I was playing because it was part of the PS Plus collection. Mm-hmm. But after playing The Last of Us Part 2 and having the not the DualSense, I'm sorry, the 3D Pulse headset on while playing that game and getting the crap scared out of me during certain scenes, I was like, you know what? I think the setting of Resident Evil Village looks so good. It's not modern. It looks, I don't know if it's, I can't recall if it's medieval or not, but it just looks different, right? A little bit more remote, kind of like the returns to the original game a little bit, wherein you're in a mansion, you're remote, and I can just imagine, a next gen experience getting the wits scared out of me. I'm looking forward to this game. I'm looking forward to seeing what they're able to do with this, what they're able to do with both that sense of dread as you're walking down halls or walking around this village, whatever's going on. I have to say, when the reveal came out for this, I didn't even think Resident Evil, but you kept shouting, I think this is Resident Evil, but I was just like, no, it's Village. Oh, it's Resident Evil Village. It looked good for not being a Resident Evil game. It just looked good from perspective, this might be a new IP. So that's my top 3rd.
Resident Evil, horror survival. I love the genre. Just first and foremost, I love the genre of horror survival. It's such a cool genre. And by the way, so few developers do this really, really well, right? So Evil Within comes to mind. I think also what you see, well, it's not really horror survival. It's almost like its own sort of genre, but you get into like the Until Dawn type games, or why can't I think of it? It's the collection of horror games, the anthology, right? So the dark anthology games from Supermassive. They just released a new one called Little Hope, which was interesting. Man of Medan previously. So, but those aren't really horror survival. But I like the genre. I like horror. I love the jump scares. And you talk about the action, right? So I actually played Resident Evil 7. And you can play it through VR, which is interesting. I didn't do that, but it's a really, really horrifying experience. And the combat's actually really, really exciting, right? So you mentioned you played Resident Evil 7?
So when the PS Plus collection came out, you had this list of games you could be able to get. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to start downloading a bunch. Oh, wait, I'm out of hard disk space. So one of the things that happens when you try to finish games, and you got some of these AAA games that take 100 gigabytes of hard disk space, you're going to have to make a few sacrifices here and there. So it's on my list of things to return to, particularly before the game comes out, like Village. I definitely want to go back to 7 because it's, again, part of the PS Plus collection. So it's kind of in my library. I'll be able to come back to it. Now with the brand new gigabit internet I've got from Fios, it should take a few minutes rather than an hour to be able to download. So I'm looking forward to being able to get back to it.
So I really liked Resident Evil 7. I played through it, but I'll tell you this. the trophy list really off-putting, right? So the trophy list was really out of control for that particular game. So I'll see how Village shakes out in terms of the trophy list and how it shakes out in terms of the game. But I agree. Look, that game looks awesome. That's a great third choice, right? So that being said, I'm going to get into my third choice, right? So my third most exciting game, which is the new Ratchet and Clank game. Right, so Ratchet and Clank from Insomniac Rift Apart is the name of this particular title. So Insomniac Games, I think, is actually, it's hard to say, right? So when I think of the best Sony first party studios, look, and we could have a whole topic on this, but Naughty Dog for me comes to mind as sort of the filet mignon of Sony first party. But I think that there's this increasing sort of conversation and argument to be made that the best Sony first party studio is actually at this point Insomniac because of what they're doing with Spider-Man. They're concurrently doing Ratchet and Clank, which the last Ratchet and Clank was an absolute blast. It was a blast to play. It was so much fun. All Ratchet and Clank games are a blast to play, but this Rift Apart feels like it's my most anticipated for two reasons. The first of which being that obviously, look, I love Ratchet and Clank. I'm very excited for a new Ratchet and Clank. But the second being that this really starts to feel like the first marquee AAA PS5 sort of title, right? Because and by the way, Insomniac had the quote unquote first one with Miles Morales. So it's interesting that Insomniac is actually double dipping here. They're now having the second marquee PS5 exclusive with Ratchet and Clank, but it feels that way. It's one of the first games that I'm seeing that can't run or wouldn't be able to run on a PS4. Right, it just wouldn't. The PS4 would not be able to handle it as you're shifting between worlds instantaneously using that SSD and that speed. It doesn't feel like a game that would even be possible on the PS4. Right, so Miles Morales, in fact, is on PS4. A lot of PS5 games coming out now are sort of dual launches with PS4 and PS5. Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart would not be possible on PS4. It's PS5 through and through. And it's exciting to sort of start to see that, and we're going to see more of it as we go on, right? So in other words, as we go through 2021 and eventually to 2022, we're going to start seeing, most all games are going to be PS5 games. They're just not possible on PS4, and I think that's going to be the quote unquote new normal. But this is the almost like the first toe in the water, so to speak, with regard to exclusive PS5 content that just can't be existing anywhere else. So Ratchet and Clank Rift Apart, Micah, is it as exciting for you as it is for me?
So once again, this is another game, Ratchet and Clank, when it came out in 2016, part of the PS Plus collection. Another game that's currently on my SSD right now and playing through it. So the other day, the kids noticed it on there and they started playing it and they started enjoying it too. Definitely a great platforming game. One I need to get back into once I get through my current library of games. So I can see why you would definitely want this game. Again, Insomniac Games, great developer, like you said. If there was any AAA studio besides Naughty Dog that publishes exclusively for Sony, it's Insomniac. It's just great, the kind of content they put out there. A lot of polish, a few bugs here and there, but otherwise polished, well done games. And I'm looking forward to be able to getting back into this game, to be able to share your excitement whenever Rift Apart comes out.
Yeah, the first Ratchet and Clank game that came out on PS4, debatable. Some people are going to say that it wasn't that difficult, but the trophy list for the PS4 reboot for Ratchet and Clank was actually is pretty difficult. It was a great challenge. I liked it because a couple races, couple different things. So I'm looking forward to Rift Apart. And when you talk about Ratchet and Clank, it's all about the weapons. It's all about, sort of collecting these, fun, like for instance, in the first game, you had sort of the Groovatron, which, had the enemies sort of dancing the disc. I mean, it's just good fun. And it's a great family game. It's a game that Eric and I would both enjoy playing, and we'll play through it together for sure. But Ratchet and Clank is my number 3. Very, very exciting. I would say let's jump into our second most anticipated games. Mike, I'll toss it over to you in this back and forth format. What is your second most anticipated game?
So I want to preface this by saying that I've read the books, I've watched the movies. I wouldn't call myself a hardcore fan, but Hogwarts Legacy sounds very, very anticipatory to me. it's a great IP, right? Like this whole you're a wizard, Harry. It seems very, very fascinating. And what they're doing is it's not set in modern times. It's set in the late 1800s, so at least 100 years before the books came out. And you're a student at Hogwarts, right? You get assigned a class. You don't even have to take a quiz. I'm sure the wizard hat or the sorting hat will tell you exactly what Uh, what house you're a part of, but it seems fascinating, right? That you'll be able to actually experience some of these worlds that you've seen in the movies, you've read in the books, and maybe there will be even more going through here. So it definitely seems very interesting. Um, from the perspective of how it's being developed, it's kind of interesting because the franchise creator, J.K. Rowling, is not directly involved in the game's development.
Mhm.
I don't know how they're actually creating content for this other than using what exists in the books and the movies. It definitely seems very good from the perspective of from what I've seen. It's going to be an action role playing game, which is right up my alley. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to being able to see what comes up with it, and I'm hoping it's not one of these games that just lets down. So that's why I'm keeping hype meter down to 0. Hype, never get hyped. It's my number one rule. Don't get hyped on games simply because of the fact that you will be disappointed. So I'd like to just see what comes out of it, especially if they're planning a release this year. Let's see what happens. It looks exciting, so I'm looking forward to this game.
Hogwarts Legacy has to be looking at, Marvel's Avenger and sort of clenching their teeth and just sort of hoping and praying that that's not their fate, that that's not the road that they're going to go down.
Right.
But I'll say this, right? A couple things. Hogwarts Legacy, when combining Harry Potter with a games as a service, as this sort of game that doesn't end, right? And combining that with Harry Potter, it feels like it's almost like the most interesting marriage you could possibly think of, because Harry Potter is this beloved IP. And we talked about last episode, we talked about licensed games and how common they were during holiday season, and how common they were, going back to the NES and the SNES, having a Batman game and a Ghostbusters game and a Turtles game, that this was so common. It's really, it is and it isn't. It's not as common as it used to be, right? So to have a game that sort of latches itself onto this Harry Potter IP, it's really, really interesting. I like that it's actually not surrounding Harry Potter, which is probably my favorite part about it. I think if it was a beat for beat recreation of, the 7 or 8 movies that existed through Harry Potter, right? If it was just a beat for beat recreation, that would be less interesting for me. The fact that
I agree.
The fact that it's your own new story, and then you're sort of, again, it's one of these games that never ends. That's super interesting. I think it's whoever greenlit this idea for Hogwarts Legacy. It's really interesting, and I think it's going to do better than Avengers. I think this is going to be a really underdog sort of in terms of success, in terms of longevity. It has the potential to be this tremendous game. I'll just put it this way: it has tremendous potential. That's the way I want to phrase it. It has tremendous potential. This Hogwarts Legacy.
So I will say it's kind of a big ask for this developer. It's for Avalanche Software. So their most recent thing they made was Cars 3 Driven to Win.
Sure.
But before that, they did the Disney Infinity games, which I love. So having kids and having them grow up at that magical age of getting into video gaming right as these games come out, Disney Infinity was so wonderful to actually be able to play with them. And I hoping Disney at some point will be able to, revive this franchise. So it's interesting when you look at this developer's list of things they've done. Like their very first thing was Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3 in 1996. And since then, Rugrats in Paris, the movie. It's like they're all over the place, right? They've taken IPs and they've made different games. So it's kind of a big ask, right? This isn't just, any kind of like big developer, but you look at the videos that have come out already, it looks AAA. So it's going to be interesting to see. Again, that's why the hype meter's down to 0.
It's sometimes I love the diversity in our taste in games, right? So having no children, Disney Infinity is not something I've ever even dreamt of picking up. So I think that's so interesting that you're bringing that sort of perspective in there as well. Because when I think back of Avalanche and what they've done in the past, I actually look back and I sort of think, well, it's an unknown for me, right? I look back and I sort of said, well, I don't know what they're sort of capable of. I don't know what they're going to do. So like I said, tremendous potential for this Hogwarts Legacy, so that this way we can all live our Harry Potter dreams, if that makes sense.
Exactly.
So I'm going to jump into my second most anticipated game. And this is actually a game that's coming out pretty soon. It's coming out in March, right? My second most anticipated game is It Takes Two. So
Oh,
it,
good one.
yeah, It Takes Two is Hazelight Studios. You probably know them just in terms of their couch co-op sort of prowess. They've been doing these games. They recently did a Prison Break game. It was a couch co-op game, and so, but it's Josef Fares is the name of the guy who's running this studio. He's known for having a Game Awards moment a couple years ago with regard to the Oscars. Please YouTube it. But It Takes Two is one of these games that I just adore because it's the couch co-op revival that I love so much, right? This is a game that, again, talk about games I can play with my wife. This is a game that Eric and I could just sort of sit through. We can play. We can hopefully both get the platinum trophy. And it looks like maybe you would assume that this game would be no longer than 10 or 12 hours. And it's just a unique experience. It's one of these games that not only is there not a lot of them being made, but it's very rare when you sort of get a good one, because there's examples of couch co-op games that are just not very interesting. So not only is it a couch co-op game, which is rare by itself, it's a couch co-op game that in fact looks very, very good. And when you look at sort of the story in terms of what it looks like, it's this young married couple and going through sort of rekindling their love for each other. So it looks like fun. The story looks interesting, and it looks like there's no other way to phrase it. It just looks like good fun, right? Have you seen It Takes Two?
I have. So it came out, what was it, during the Game Awards it was announced and the reveal. And it just seemed very, very fascinating from this co-op perspective, right? I mean, I don't even know. Can I play it by myself, or do I have to bring somebody with me? It'll be interesting to see. But I'm looking at Josef Fares's, resume, and he's all over the place. He's made films, he's made games. He made Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons.
Great game.
That was a great game. Right? Just this little top-down game where you're two brothers and you're working together to be able to actually do things together. So it's actually kind of fascinating to see how this game will shake out, right? I'm seeing exactly what you're talking about, the passionate speech. I agree with every single thing he said here.
Google it for your own amusement. But the previous game they did was a Prison Break game. It was called A Way Out. Very similar, right? So in other words, similar in practice in the sense that it's split screen, it's co-op, and you have to work together very sort of symphonically with your couch co-op partner to sort of get to the end. This seems much more lighthearted. A Way Out was, again, it was sort of this dark, prison sort of story. So this feels much lighter. And yeah, Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons was incredible in terms of game. And that was interesting because you could see how they got to the couch co-op, and they got there in a very, very interesting way, which is that they used, so if you played Brothers, it was not you could play with two controllers, but the idea was, and this was sort of the gimmick of the game, which was that each stick, right? So in other words, each of your analog sticks controlled one of the different brothers.
Right, I remember, right.
Very, very interesting. So they went from that to actually just, we're just going to go 2 feet in and we're going to do couch co-op games. So I think that it's really interesting. It's coming out soon. So this is actually a game that when we talk about anticipated games, this is a game that is going to be right around the corner. I think Hazelight gets a little bit of grief just because they're published by EA. And so EA, having this reputation as the big bad wolf and all of this, they kind of get a little bit of a bad rap because every time they show one of these trailers, you see the EA logo, which to some gamers is a little bit off-putting, but they're very independent in terms of their creativity, very independent in terms of what they want to do. So shout out to Hazelight, shout out to Josef Fares, and shout out to It Takes Two, my second most anticipated game.
Right. I agree with that statement. You got to look at the developer, right? EA, giant corporation that publishes so many different games. And, I mean, they're a business, right? They're in it to make money. And these people, they count beans all the time, right? So it's like microtransactions, push that into the games that make sense. Madden, Star Wars Battlefront, push it into those kind of games. But, when you're a developer like this, I mean, he made A Way Out. So I don't think there was any microtransactions in that game. I sincerely doubt this game, It Takes Two, will go down that same route. So definitely anticipating that game.
Yeah, EA gets a bad rap. And by the way, look, they earn their reputation in many ways, right? So in other words, with the microtransaction and things like Star Wars and things like this, a lot of times, look, they earn that rep. But this is not, they just published this game, but It Takes Two, looking very, very good. I will toss it back over to you, Micah, for your most anticipated game of 2021, your number one game. I'm anxious. Let's hear
So, number one game, drum roll, please.
it.
God of War Ragnarok. So 2018's remake of God of War brought me into the God of War family, right? So I have PS now, and I've got to get back into the original games to actually try the gameplay of the original games because I did not play them, right? God of War, the 2018 game, was my first foray into God of War, and it was a little bit of a long journey. It started earlier in the year, and then I went away. So I think I started in I talked about it right before I did the platinum for the game. I got started it in, I want to say possibly July, and went on and off up until I got the platinum trophy. I want to say in late October, early November. So it was one of these on and off games to actually get to that point. Um, and I really did enjoy the game. It wasn't a matter of, why didn't you just play it and finish it in 2 weeks? It wasn't that kind of game to actually do. It was one of those games that I felt you had to sometimes take a moment to step back and appreciate what you just went through, right? So, I don't want to spoil the game too much for people, but there are moments in the game where you're going through traumatic moments of reliving Kratos' memories, and you can definitely feel it. And the God of War documentary was a great way to see how this game was made and the amazing acting put into it. But Ragnarok seems like it's going to be a great follow-up just because of the fact that the events that occurred in the first game are going to follow you into the next game. Now that Atreus is a teenager, I'm more than certain you're going to be seeing some moodiness in his demeanor compared to the first game. And certainly with Kratos, one of the big reveals at the end of the game, you kind of see what his fate may entail. So it'll be interesting to see where Ragnarok goes, and the big question of if it actually comes out in 2021 at all, because right now it has no release date other than just saying 2021. They got 12 months to be able to do it, so we will see.
So, just to talk about God of War 2018 for just a brief second, right? So, number one, I think that is pound for pound, right? And again, all debatable, all subjective, right? But I think God of War 2018 is pound for pound the best game of the entire PS4 generation. I think by the way, if you're listening to this PlayStation podcast and you have not played God of War for PS4, please go get your mind right? Get inside that PS collection and get to work on God of War 2018. I think it's pound for pound the best game on PS4 for the entire generation. It's truly a work of art. You also mentioned that documentary, which was really interesting. By the way, if you're just interested in what it takes to make a video game and how difficult that is, right? And all of the different pieces in terms of music, in terms of orchestra, in terms of gameplay, in terms of reception, in terms of media, in terms of leaks. Raising Kratos is a great documentary on sort of how the sausage is made, so to speak, with regard to video games. So God of War 2018, really, really tremendous. Now, let's talk about Ragnarok. Is Ragnarok, and this is where I would say, is Ragnarok a 2021 game? That's the question. So is the new God of War game going to come out this year? I think that's the only question mark. If it comes out in 2021, look, I am over the moon for Ragnarok. I am absolutely, that's day one. That's just all up in the business. That is Ragnarok for 24 straight hours all day, right? I really am looking forward to it. But do you think there's any chance that Ragnarok gets pushed to 2022? Do you feel confident that it's a 2021 game? Right? So what do you feel about this release date? Is it coming out this year?
That's the thing. I mean, you look at the way previous games have come out for Santa Monica Studio, and usually the original God of War 2005, God of War 2 2007. That's 2 years later, right? And then 3 years later, God of War 3, and then 3 years after that, God of War Extension. So you're about in that time frame of this original engine, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's most likely they're using the same engine from the original game, but hopefully beefed up to take advantage of PlayStation 5 features. But it's a good question of whether or not they are going to go down the path that Cyberpunk had to go down. Is just this is an unknown. Like, is it going to be cross-platform or not? Because there's been, I want to say, speaking out of both mouths kind of things. Nobody really knows if it's going to be PlayStation 5 or PlayStation 4 and PlayStation 5. So it'll be very, very interesting to see if that decision is made and if that will contribute at all. And it has to. It has to contribute to the fact that when you're developing for two different platforms, you can't make it amazing on one and then awful on another. You have to focus and make sure it's polished and it runs well and it actually works on the other platform, because it's completely unfair to anybody that purchases your product to have a game that just does not work and run the way the first game ran when it came out in 2018. So I think the time frame kind of fits, but I think it's just the fact that if they're trying to implement new PlayStation 5 features, like taking advantage of the DualSense controller, which I hope they do. I mean, if they don't do that, that will be disappointing. But they have to take advantage of the new existing hardware in order for it to be a great game, and also be able to satisfy the original platform as well, if that's their ultimate goal. Right now, it's unknown.
Let me ask you something. Do you even want to see this game on PS4? Is this a game that you even want on PS4? Because ultimately, I feel like this game should be made for PS5 from the ground up. I want this game to be so, you talk about unique and mind-blowing. I want this game on 10. I don't want to see a God of War Ragnarok that is slightly toned down. I understand the value of having a PS4 version, because there's 120 odd some PS4s out there in the wild. You want this game in as many hands as possible. But I think Ragnarok should be one of these unleash the beast type moments where it's just like, look, make this a PS5 game, make it as gorgeous as possible, take all the time you need, and have this exactly use the DualSense controller. I would want to see this game as PS5's sort of almost like marquee advertisement, right? So in other words, why do you want to buy a PS5? Because of God of War Ragnarok. This should be a moment. This should be a moment for PS5. Do you want to see this game on PS4?
Let me put it like this. I don't not want to see it on PS4. It's just like to that point you just made, like how we just recently saw some numbers on VG charts of how many PS5s actually sold. I think it was somewhere near 3 million.
Yeah.
That is not a lot, right? And you can't push a lot of units on just 3 million right now. You'd be waiting until at least late 21, early 22 before you start to see the numbers you would expect to see for this type of game. Yeah, I don't not want to see it on PS4. I just want them to actually make it a good PS5 experience too. And I think they'll be able to. I think it's possible. We saw it with Miles Morales. It was a cross-gen game, and they were able to make it playable and not in a bad way on PS4 and PS4 Pro, while at the same time making it a quite quality next gen game. Like, they were able to do some amazing things with they had the performance mode and then the real-time tracing mode, and then about a month later they released, here's a performance mode with real-time tracing mode. So it's like they have the technology, they know how to do this, and hopefully these studios share info and tidbits with each other, like, hey, if you're going to be doing this, you should be doing that.
I think
I think it's possible.
I think you actually touched on something very interesting, and when I think of why, this actually goes into why I don't think that this is a 2021 game, right? And why I think that it's there's too many positives for sticking this in a drawer and waiting until 2022. You have the first positive, which is the obvious positive, which is more time for development, right? Less crunch. You allow Sony Santa Monica to do its business and to manufacture the best possible game. But you touched on the second point, which is interesting, which is that it's because one of the reasons to hold this off until 2022 is because it allows PS5 to sell more, right? So in other words, you're allowing yourself an additional full calendar year for them to manufacture more PS5s, to sell more PS5s, and hopefully get to that. You would hope that PS5 would be in and around the 10 to 15 million sort of sales mark, and that's sell through, right? You would hope to have 10 to 15 million PS5s out in the wild before you throw Ragnarok out there, because even with a super high attach rate, right, you want to be able to sell, this is going to be for sure, you want this to be a 10 million seller, you want this to be a 15 million seller. If it can sell 20 million, even better, so you want this to be a big selling game. And the third piece, which I'm sort of thinking about now just as I'm talking through it, which is that this is going to be a game with legs. This game is going to sell for a long time. This is going to be
Agreed.
the original, the 2018 God of War, probably still selling. I mean, obviously it's part of the PS collection and it's on sale essentially every week, but you would assume that that's still moving units. So this is going to be a game with long, long legs. But I'll be interested to see, Micah. Obviously, God of War Ragnarok, we're going to have, we'll probably do a whole episode around God of War Ragnarok when that comes out. So much anticipate, much excite for this game. So that being said, I want to hop into my most anticipated game, which, look, my most anticipated game is not nearly. It doesn't have the gravitas of the God of War Ragnarok sort of realm. But I do want to give a shout out to this game. It's another game that's coming up. It's coming up very soon, right? So this is another very soon game, which is Returnal. And I think that we talk about PS5 games and what do you play on the PS5? And if you own a PS5, what are you supposed to buy? This is the game you're supposed to buy. Returnal, coming from Housemarque, right? Housemarque is it's this Swedish studio out in the middle of nowhere. They're absolutely amazing. They're known for, so if you're talking about the resume of Housemarque, their two most popular games. From a sales standpoint, I'd have to see this, but from their standpoint, you look at Dead Nation, which was a very, very popular game, and Super Stardust Ultra and Super Stardust Ultra HD. So there are these twin stick shooters that are score chasers, right? So in other words, scoreboards, and you're running up the score, and you're just trying to sort of get the best possible score, beat the game several times. It's about those easy to play, difficult to master type of games. So Housemarque, I love really almost everything they've ever put out, right? So you go back to 2017, their most recent releases, right? So they released Next Machina, which was, again, twin stick shooter, score chaser. And they also had another game, Matterfall, which was very interesting. But so they also did Alien Nation on PS4, which I thought was very, very good. Although Alien Nation received a little bit of critical dislike, not everyone loved it as much as I did, but that's okay, right? Because I loved it. And they also had a PS4 launch title that was very, very popular, which is why the only reason why I say that Dead Nation and Super Stardust are not the top sellers is because this was a launch game for PS4, Resogun. And that game probably has a way higher sell-through, but it's an amazing game. I love everything Housemarque does. So let's talk about Returnal. It's third person, it's action, it looks extremely difficult, which I love, and it looks like it's going to be this, again, easy to play, difficult to master type games. It almost has the element of a roguelike. So in other words, it's one of these, you're caught in this infinite loop. So you have this space ranger who is existing in this world. I don't know the story entirely. I'm very anticipating to hear more about it. But you are essentially on this planet and you are caught in this time loop and you are going over and over again, I guess, trying to sort of fight your way out. And it's a roguelike in the sense that every time you sort of awake and go through, it's different every time you go through. So Returnal, Mike, have you seen Returnal? Is this what is your excitement level for this?
So I'm looking at a little bit of brief footage, and it kind of reminds me of Doom a little bit. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just showing my just preconceived notions or something of seeing the red background and everything. But it just reminds me of Doom. But I don't know if it'll play like Doom, right? It's because it's third person, and it's also got science fiction. So Doom does too, but psychological horror, yeah, Doom has that too. But I think what I'm most excited about looking at this is the roguelike features. That the fact that if I go through this entire level and I die, I now know that everything I learned up until this point does not matter. So everything I did before, throw it out the window because it's not going to be the exact same, right? Because apparently after every death, you're resurrected and you have to go through this whole new foreign environment, fighting everything in an ever-changing world. And so it'll be interesting how they tie this type of gameplay element into a story. Because I have no idea about the story so far. I don't think it's really well known other than just like what's going to happen. But from a tech perspective, this is cool. The fact that it will have DualSense controller support and the Tempest engine, which is used for 3D spatial audio on the PlayStation 5. And if you want to have a really, blow your brain kind of moment, like trying to understand some architecture, look at the Tempest engine design Mark Cerny gave a talk about. I mean, they really put some thought into 3D spatial audio. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how this game works with the Pulse 3D headset. and also understanding how all the different senses of being able to play with the DualSense work and immerse the player. Like that's the goal of what House Marquee is trying to do. They're trying to take all the features of the PS5 and coming out with a set in stone date of March 19th. So I think we're probably going to have a episode devoted to this. Definitely talking about this game. It's definitely going up in my list of games I'm probably going to get the first day, simply because of the fact that I usually try to hold off on games. I don't want to buy into it until I've seen reviews. But as long as the week before I'm not hearing if I'm hearing nothing but positive coverage of this game leading up to it, other than very hush hush, I'll know it's probably a good game to get into first day.
Yeah, there's so much to be excited about here because it does look difficult. By the way, we talked about this last episode, which was that how difficult it is to have this engaging loot treadmill, right? So in other words, having that replayability, and that the replayability is not necessarily it's not necessarily there to begin with. You have to create it. Right? So in other words, you have to create this desire to play over and over again. It's a high bar to clear for Housemarque. I hope that when we talk about Returnal and the replayability, I hope it sort of goes down the road of, say, Rogue Legacy, right? So in Rogue Legacy, which is another roguelike, you sort of are rewarded by every time you die, the game assumes that you're going to die over and over again, and it provides you with sort of almost benefits. Every time you go through, you just get a little bit stronger, you get a little bit better, you unlock all of these features. I hope that Returnal does this in a way where, as you die over and over again, the game assumes that, it's a difficult game, you're going to die a lot, that every time you die and you sort of go through that loop again, I hope that the game rewards you in some way where you feel like you're getting stronger every time you go through. So I hope that Returnal hits that. That's not going to be easy. We should absolutely do an episode to Returnal when it drops. I think it's going to be a good launch for them. Returnal has, look, realistically, Housemarque has struggled in terms of sales. I know that they even put out a press release back in 2017 saying that, they're going to make this tremendous shift in the way that they make games. And thankfully, they've decided to sort of return to their roots a little bit. I know they almost made a sort of a Fortnite clone, which I think they canceled. So Housemarque, I think they need a win. I think this is a big win for them. And I'm, like I said, I'm over the moon for this game. I think it's going to be great. It looks phenomenal. Housemarque has a long-standing tradition of quality. So when that time comes in March, Micah, we will absolutely dedicate some time and talk about it and play through it. And look, we'll reach out to Housemarque as well and sort of see what we can do to sort of make sure that the launch coverage is what it needs to be, if that makes sense.
Right, exactly. And I'm so glad they're not going for a Fortnite clone. I mean, you don't need Fortnite clones, right? The Battle Royale is kind of a saturated thing, and people just want to play Fortnite. So let them play Fortnite and make your game, all right? That's what I want to see. I want to see people and developers make the game they want to make, not try to just go for something that's like, what's going to make us the most money? What are people playing? Just make your game, right? Make it fun, make it interesting, and put it out there. So this looks exciting.
The question that we got for this topic, I think we already kind of touched on, but I'll just bring it up anyway, just to sort of get it out there. You can write in a question for us to answer on the air. So if you would like to write us in a question, please write us in at show@playnationpodcast.com. So feel free to write in. But the question that we got for this particular topic was, which games do you think will be delayed into 2022? I think we already kind of talked about that with Ragnarok and whether or not we think that's going anywhere. One of the games that's, I think, very conspicuously missing from my list and perhaps yours as well, Micah, which was Horizon Forbidden West. It's not that I'm not excited for Horizon Forbidden West. Horizon Forbidden West is probably one of my most anticipated PS5 games overall. I just don't believe it's a 2021 game. I just don't think it's going to come out this year. Any games that, just to sort of touch on Horizon Forbidden West, Micah, are you in agreement or are you in disagreement that Horizon Forbidden West will be a 2022 game?
I mean, you got a point. I mean, we're still going through a pandemic, right? Studios are still remote, so everybody doesn't have all the hardware right next to them to be able to develop, right? But you also got to think that at this point, hopefully, everybody's figured out, okay, we're in it for the long haul. Let's order new hardware, whatever we got to do to be able to make sure that we can get these games out on time. We said 2021, let's try to do it. And I think, I think you raise a good point of if you're trying to make a game that's not just a rehash of the original, right? So you're trying to actually go further into this world rather than showing the original world, right? You're going into the West, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think you have brand new territory to go into, art assets, sounds, enemy design. You have so much that you have to design to make it a unique game that stands out from the original, right? So you got a lot going for you. And I think this kind of same thing applies to God of War Ragnarok a little bit too. Like when you're playing the original God of War, you are going through almost every single realm, except for a few that seem to be locked permanently in the game, right? So there seems to be a few that you can go to, but how will the game change slightly? Will it just be the same setting 10 years later, or will it be brand new? How are they going to do it? It's hard to say. And I have to say, like, in a world where games should be delayed, Cyberpunk for the next gen experience is supposed to come out this year too,
Right.
and hopefully it won't be like. Hopefully CPDR is able to figure out. Well, we did put out a good performance on PC, so as long as we have the right hardware, performance isn't bad, and they're able to figure that out. But the first 3 months of 2021 are dedicated to improving the first launch, right? So you can't put dev time into both. You got to focus on one, and not necessarily the other. So I think there's a lot of games out there that say they're slated for 2021, but it's always possible they will get delayed.
So my biggest fear for both of these games, when you talk about Horizon, we talk about Ragnarok, and I already mentioned this, right? So my biggest fear for both of these games is the same. My biggest fear is that they lower the bar. So in other words, they lower the bar for PS4 to obviously keep it as accessible as possible. My hope is that they in fact raise the bar to PS5 only and truly blow our minds. Unleash the beast, as I said, right? So also not on my list, but I just want to give a shout out before I move to topic 2. Scarlet Nexus. That game I'm also much excited for. So give a shout out to Scarlet Nexus. You know what I mean? Bandai Namco, very Japanese game. It's very much a JQ game. So Scarlet Nexus just missed the list, but I just wanted to give them a shout, Micah, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So topic 2. Let's jump into the second topic. This is a really, really interesting topic. PS4 Pro discontinued in Japan. Right? According to GamesIndustry.biz, Sony will only continue to manufacture the 500 gigabyte slim model in the region going forward. All others, including the white 500 gigabyte model and all other variations, will become unavailable once the current stock has been sold. No confirmation yet as to whether this applies to Western territories. So, if you are in Japan, right, now is the time. If you want a PS4 Pro, right, these are becoming collector's items in Japan now. They are discontinuing it. If you want to buy one, now's the time to do it for our Japanese listeners. But the PS4 Pro being discontinued in Japan, I think that this is a foreshadowing of things to come. And, by the way, great segue coming off of Horizon Forbidden West and Ragnarok, how I hope that they're, PS5, absolutely, gangbusters. But, is this the beginning of the end for the PS4? Are we starting to wind down on the PS4 era? And I think rightfully so. I'm not saying I was happy to see this, but I look at the article and I sort of squint my eyes and I nod my head and I say, yep, that sounds right.
Yeah, I mean, this is the whole point of this is to actually ramp up production for the PS5. So why are you producing an old product that is already saturated in the market? Yeah, you need to start focusing on PS5. And I will say that the PS4 Pro was very difficult to get over the summer. So I recently traded in my PS4 by selling it on eBay, and I actually had to buy a PS4 Pro on eBay, which everyone may say, well, why the heck did he do that? He could have just waited a few months until November, but again, that wasn't guaranteed either. So I wanted to make sure I had a Pro model because I was starting to play God of War. I wanted to make sure I had a good frame rate and everything. I wanted to improve upon some of the games I had, and ended up giving that as a great gift to my dad. But I think this is the point, that it's to ramp up production for the PS5, which if they can do that throughout the first quarter of 2021, then and say, okay, so in the first 3 months of, we were just looking at, at least I was just looking at VG charts recently to try to see what the hardware data was looking like, but I'm pretty sure based on these numbers of, and I don't know where they pull them from, but based on the numbers, like PS5 has gotten 3 million in the first few months of production. Now, obviously, a lot of that was probably the months leading up to November, right? But if you look at how much they've actually sold since then, a lot of it's been in the lower numbers compared to the first month, right? And that's simply because of the fact that you had all this time to be able to develop and manufacture these consoles. So looking at the numbers, the peak on Saturday, November 14th was 1.5 million, right? So you got to assume all of that was in the months leading up to November. And then it dipped all the way down to 400,000 on November 28th, 2 weeks later. And that's pretty much where it's been. Is every week you're about 300 to 400,000 per week. So I have to assume between 300 and 400,000 is how quickly they can manufacture these consoles. So if I don't see these numbers start to go up over the next couple months now that they've discontinued, then I'll know that their original plan of trying to discontinue something to ramp up production of the PS5 was for naught. But that's my hope is, again, if they're able to ramp up this production and get up to this magic mark. So God of War in 2018 sold 5 million the first month it was on sale in 2018. If they can get at least 10 to 15 million of these out by the summer, right? Then you have a much easier decision as a studio to say, okay, we are going to focus PS5 only. It is assumed a year from now that 10 to 15 million will hopefully be at 50 million sold, based on the fact that they're going to be cranking these out one by one by one by one by one, and it's going to ramp up production quicker and quicker and quicker.
Yeah, that's the story. I think you hit the nail right on the head, which is that you could rephrase this headline to sort of read Sony makes room for PS5. I think that's the 100% the story. I think that, there's two things that are very interesting to me. The first of which is that the PS4 Pro, we don't really know how well the PS4 Pro actually sold, right? So Sony has been very, very, vocal, and this is how it usually works, right? So in other words, if something sells really, really well, then you share the sales numbers, right? We sold 1 million, we sold 10 million, we sold 100 million, right? If sales are good, you share your sales numbers. They have, even though they've been very vocal about PS4 sales and sort of how many PS4s they sold and all that jazz, they've been very sort of, we'll say, conspicuously quiet on how well the PS4 Pro sold, sort of that specific model, how well the PS4 Pro sold. So the fact that they haven't released sales data on the PS4 Pro, or at least very openly, tells me that I think most people are still buying the PS4 Slim, right? They're still buying the if people are buying PS4s, they're buying the base PS4. They're not buying the Pro version, right? So I think that it's interesting in one way, which is that, well, how well has the PS4 Pro actually sold? And then, by the way, if you go down to the sort of the sub question, which would be that how well has PS4 Pro actually sold in Japan? Which is probably, that's a very handheld culture, right? Probably sold even worse there. So I think that the PS4 Pro hasn't sold well, or as well as Sony would hope, and that's my guess, right? So that would be point one. But then point two is the obvious point, which is that this is the beginning of the end of PS4. And again, I'm sad to see PS4 go. I think PS4 was one of the greatest game generations, so you talk, or console generations of our lives. So I don't want to shortchange the PS4 in terms of what it's done and what it's accomplished and what it means to us. But it's one of those things. It's time to go, right? We're in PS5 at this point. I think it's time to start. Time to start sunsetting the PS4. And to me, like I said, I squint my eyes, nod my head. It's like, yep, it's time to say goodbye.
Yeah, I think it's time to say goodbye to it as a game console that you buy games for, but I think it's going to have a home in the home, right? Simply because of the fact that, similar to the PS2 for years, that was just a cheap DVD player to have, right?
Right.
Even if you had a PS3, you still kept your PS2 if you could, simply because of the fact that the back bedroom might need it. And now, what's awesome about the PS4 is PS Remote Play. We did not have this a long time ago, right? You wanted to play the new console, you had to play it at the TV it was at, or go move it somewhere else. That's not necessary anymore, right? I could play it right here from my computer remotely, right? I could play it from the TV over there if I wanted to, if I had another PS4, which, if find a good deal on it, I might actually do it, simply because of the fact that, similar to you, I do love the PS4 generation. It was a good generation. It got me back into single player gaming because after the Xbox 360 era and all my friends moving over to PS4, but everybody moving on from, playing multiplayer games and going into, whatever they're interested in, I started to find out what I'm interested in. And I like that. It got me into a new home, so to speak, right? So I don't think it's going to go away. I'm actually kind of interested to see 1 year from now if this 113 million units sold somehow goes up to 130, simply because of the fact that if they're still making this, there must still be demand out there. So it'll be interesting to see.
We've once again answered our question ahead of schedule, as we do, which, by the way, you can write in a question to the PlayNation podcast, and we wish you would. You can write in at show@playnationpodcast.com. We'll read your question on the air. But our question was, does this show confidence from Sony that the PS5 is actually going to supplant the PS4 in the coming 24 months? Look, I think the answer is obviously yes. I think that, it has to be eyes forward, in terms of where the company is going and where the brand is going. This has to be PS5 forward. I understand when you launch the console, and you ultimately have this sort of, it happened with PS3 and PS4, right? You have dual sort of, launches and things like this, games that are PS3 games and PS4 games. We're seeing that now with PS4 games that are also PS5 games. But if PS4 were in the room with me right now, it would be very much like, look, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, right? It's time to say goodbye. Right? It's time
Closing
to go. Exactly, right? It's closing time for PS4 in a very big, and that's what I'm saying. Like, I actually have fears that because PlayStation 4 was so successful, that Sony's going to sort of, cling to the past almost in a way and sort of keep it around a little, wear out its welcome a little bit longer than it needs to be. So PS4, we'll see what happens. We'll keep our eyes on this story moving forward, and we'll look for more updates. But PS4 Pro being discontinued in Japan, that's a big deal. And, ultimately I think that, look, the sun is setting, it's closing time. You know what I mean, Micah?
Right.
So let's move on to our third and final topic. This is going to be a fun topic, which is nostalgia. Right. So in other words, we are, as we always say, we are bespoke gentlemen. We are older gentlemen. Nostalgia is a big thing. Are games as good as they used to be? Are the best games in the past? Was gaming perfected in the retro consoles, or is all that just hype? Or a combination of wishful thinking and jaded memories of days gone by? Nostalgia is a funny thing, Micah, because it's, things are never as good or as bad as they seem to be, right? So in other words, in the present. So, but when you look back on things, you do get this sort of rose-colored glasses that you can look through. When you think of nostalgia and you think of retro gaming, what was the best time for gaming? Is it right now, or is it some time ago?
Yeah, so I mean that term itself, nostalgia, that's Greek, which just shows you how old this idea is, right? This feeling, it's sentimental for the past, right? So for me, like, nostalgia it's like multifaceted. It's not just gaming, it's lots of different things. But when it comes to gaming, it just very comes down to those feelings you have playing games. And I have to say, one of those great feelings I had was, I just mentioned it, the Xbox 360 generation. The first time you got into multiplayer, playing Call of Duty with friends and stuff like that, and just jumping into lobbies, getting called nasty things by people, it was kind of, there's a sentimentality to it, right? I have this sentimental feeling to it that you and I, our co-workers, would play Call of Duty together after having worked same day together, and being able to do that, being able to be on the same team, learn from each other, get called a noob. There's some nostalgia to that, simply because of the fact that we don't do that anymore, right? Right now, you and I were both single player gamers. We'll probably play co-op once or twice, if there's a game that makes sense like that. But other than that, you and I, we don't have the same multiplayer taste. So, and some of my other friends too don't have the same multiplayer taste, or don't even game anymore, right? So there's some sentimental feelings I have about that, and it goes back years, even before Xbox 360. Like, the very first online game I ever played was EverQuest, and getting into this massive world. and just being blown away. You're talking about graphics from late '90s, early 2000s, and the being connected on a dial-up modem, and the technology now is just looked at. Why would you like that? But it's just like, why would I not? It was amazing back then, and now I go back to it, and I just cannot get into it the way I did before, and it's this pain, right? It's like I don't want to play the old games I played before. I want to feel the same way I did before when I played these games. That's really what it comes down to.
Yeah, I've actually flipped on this over time. This is something that I've slowly changed my mind on, right? Because I used to be one of these. The way I used to think, and in a way, I mean, look, it's an understandable way to think. I used to think that, well, there are like the gaming was perfected in a lot of these old consoles, right? So in other words, like for instance, I grew up playing Mega Man. We mentioned this in earlier episodes, right? So, but like I grew up playing Mega Man, and I remember I was even telling Erica, I was like, look, they don't make games like this anymore. You have to understand that this was platforming perfected. This was truly sort of the peak game. But I've changed on this over time because I think you have truly explained it very, very well. I don't think it's that the games were the greatest. I think it was just the greatest time in my life. Right? In other words, it was just one of these times where it's like, it's not that necessarily that the games are awesome. It's that the time you were living in while you were playing the game was awesome.
Yeah.
Right? So in other words, it was a simple, when you're young and you're playing games and you're just really, again, you spend all afternoon playing these things. Christmas morning, when you get the new game, and you're a child and you're young, and that feeling is the best feeling. Right. And that's what you associate with, the games. Like if you tried to go back, it's really difficult. Like if you were to sort of turn on, maybe, one of these NES classics or a PS1 classic, or go back and play an old PS1 game and really hold that side by side with, again, we talked about it earlier, like 2018 God of War. It's really, really difficult to sort of say, well, I think Excite Bike on NES is better than God of War 2018. It's just it's a bridge too far. I think it's too much to sort of say that. I think it does. There are rose-colored glasses when you sort of make those comparisons.
Right. Yeah, I think it's hard to actually put on the rose tinted goggles, and some of my friends do this. Some of them, they still play EverQuest every now and then, and they play the game and they try to get me into it, and I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't keep getting into this. The gameplay is just, my tastes have changed, right? And it's kind of the fascinating thing of like how we change over time, right? Like I used to be much bigger into PC gaming and MMOs, and now I'm more into action adventure type games that are single player, simply because of the fact that the way I've grown into gaming over time has changed. It's waxed and waned, right? So it's interesting how we all change our styles and sometimes drift and grow apart from each other in terms of like what we all used to like. But we still remain friends anyway, simply because of the fact that that's what friendship's about. It's not just this gaming that we got into together. It's more than that. It's multifaceted friendship.
There's an interesting psychological discussion to be had on where we as human beings derive value, right? So in other words, where do we derive value from, and why is something valuable? So in other words, why is God of War 2018 more valuable than the NES title Excitebike? Why is it one more valuable than the other? So there's an interesting discussion in terms of what is valuable and why we find the value in it, right? But let's actually get into the question for this particular topic, right? So again, show at playnationpodcast.com if you would like to write in a question, which is that really simple and straightforward question, which is, it's a tough one, but I think it's just, worth the kick around, which is that what is the best console of all time? Micah, when you think of the best console of all time, what do you think that is? What does that answer come to your mind?
I mean, it depends on what age I am, but right now, going through everything I've gone through and what I always come back to, it's the Super Nintendo. It is just the original console I had. I think we had the original Nintendo at one point, but Super Nintendo was mine. It was in my bedroom. It was mine. I could have it. And I say mine. My sisters played it too. So did my dad. But that was, what got me into gaming. I remember playing Super Mario World and beating Bowser for the first time. I remember being able to play The Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past. These are the games that have a little bit of nostalgia, and I come back to them and I still play them, right? I can still play these games and not feel like, oh, this is trash. The gameplay is awful. The gameplay was never awful. That's what was so great about them.
Right.
The gameplay was great, and it's still great 25 nearly 30 years later. Like Super Mario World came out in 1990. That's a 31-year-old game, only 5 years younger than me. And that's the fascinating thing about it. It's just simply because of the fact that, having played these games and thinking they were great then, I still think they're great now. So for me, it's Super Nintendo.
Are you ready for this answer? I'm gonna blow your mind with this answer to this question. What is the best console of all time? Are you ready for this? The best console, the best console of all time. Three words: the current generation. Whatever the current generation is, the best console of all time is the current generation. What is the best time for gaming? Answer: today. Right. So in other words, I've shifted on this. I used to say the old NES was the best console of all time. I've come off of that, and now I sort of have this now mindset where I think that the current generation is generating the best games that have ever been made. Right. When we first bought our PS4, right, and or say 2018, we're using this as an example all episodes. So why stop now? 2018, God of War comes out. That's the best game. Right. At that moment in time, when that game comes out, that is the peak of gaming, right? When Horizon Zero Dawn came out, that was the peak of gaming. The peak of gaming has now shifted, right? Because now we have PS5 and we're going to have Returnal, and not that Returnal is going to be the greatest game of all time, but we have, these, when the bar keeps moving, right? The goalpost keeps moving, and it keeps moving downfield. The best time for gaming is the moment that you are currently living in, because that's where the best games are coming out. Now, granted, there's a very, very compelling and interesting sort of through point that you can kind of go down, which is that, well, games that stand the test of time. So in other words, you could play the original Tomb Raider with all its polygonal glory, right? That game does not hold up well in the same way that, say, the original Super Mario Brothers holds up. Right. So simultaneously, it's funny. We were talking about this last episode, that the original Last of Us, the further we get away from it, the more retro it seems, the more archaic and the more prehistoric the gameplay seems. Right. So in other words, games that stand the test of time, I get it. Right. So in other words, that is a true mark of quality and of success. Right. I think, when you talk about original SNES and NES games, there are games on these consoles that have stood the test of time, right? Mega Man, you mentioned some games and the Mario, like the original Mario, etc. I get it. They stood the test of time, but it's really difficult. And this is where I get into my point. I think it's really difficult to look at those games, hold them side by side with Ragnarok when that drops, and to objectively say that Ragnarok is of less quality or of less value than any retro game you can kind of hold it up against, if that makes sense.
I see what you're saying. And I don't think I'm necessarily, I want to make it clear. I'm not necessarily saying quality or anything like that.
Right.
But that feeling of like, if you relate it back to nostalgia and things like that, that's where I feel like the generation I love comes back to, like having the RetroPie and playing emulators and stuff like that. Nintendo, don't sue me. But just coming down to the fact that, that's what I grew up with, and that's why I enjoy coming back to every now and then to play. But to your point, I'm not playing this every day, right? When Ragnarok drops, I'm playing Ragnarok. When Returnal drops, I'm playing Returnal. So yeah, I can see your point of, the current generation is the best generation of all time. But we also know that's not always the case, right? So it waxes and wanes. So like PS3, like if you paid the $600 for that console, it had a rocky launch, right? So it didn't have all the great games. It took some time to build those great games, right? And I think you're not wrong in the sense that this generation, the PS5 generation, and you can say the same thing for the Xbox Series X with its backwards compatibility. These have both been trying to bring the last generation games with them while moving forward. So it's been able, and I think a lot of people have been saying this, I've been going through my PS4 library a lot on the PS5 because there just are no PS5 only games out right now that you can actually play if you haven't already, right? If you haven't already beaten Demon Souls and not gotten frustrated by it, you're probably not going to. Or if you've already beaten Miles Morales, you're probably not playing it unless you're like me and trying to get the Platinum Trophy, which, by the way, that will be a Twitch event. I will keep everybody posted through our Twitter when that actually happens, have a little event happening. But to your point, though, I think I agree with that. Yeah, this generation is probably going to be one of the best generations just from a technological perspective and where we're going. Like, great technological advancements have been made in this generation compared to the last generation, right? PS4 kind of feels like it was a refresh. It was like, oh yay, more hard drive space. Oh yay, better processor. But this time, it's different. There's a lot more going on.
Yeah, keep us posted on that event. Much excited for that event. I look forward to that event. I will certainly be there. But yeah, listen, I'm conflicted. I'm a torn man, right? So in other words, I'm a complicated soul as it relates to this, because I do believe, so, as I went through, right, objectively speaking, the best games are the games that are coming out right now. But simultaneously, and again, just to sort of highlight the other side, which is that, look, I was watching a YouTube video the other day on there's a museum, right? So in other words, there's an official museum of video game history, and just watching someone walk through that, and they're showing all these things. It's in Texas. If there wasn't a pandemic going on, I'd be like, I want to go. But it's as I'm watching the YouTube video of them walk through this video game museum, all I'm thinking in my head is, I'm so happy that they're doing this. This is so important, right? So in other words, I'm so happy that this exists. This is so important, because it is, right? So in other words, when you talk about, and we used this phrase last episode, which is that, where are you going, where have you been? I don't think you can know where you're going unless you know where you've been. So I do think that nostalgia, and you talk about retro gaming and the video games history, it has a place in terms of greatness, and in terms of games that have stood the test of time. So I'm a conflicted soul as it relates to this, Micah, but ultimately, this is one of these things where, I'd like to hear what the people have to say. This is one where there's no right answer. There's no wrong answer. Only, we'll say, eloquent answers, if you will.
Yeah, exactly. It's just opinions. What a great thing, a video game museum. Like, if I had the ability and the money, and the time and the resources, and not going through a pandemic, I would love a video game museum, because I'd love to be able to just have people coming in, seeing the old generations, experiencing the new, and then having a generation of the future, right? That's what I love to think about, is what does gaming look like 10 years from now, right? We used to think about it before, like, oh, VR is going to be huge. VR is going to be huge. We've been saying that since the 90s when the Virtual Boy came out, right? And VR is huge a little bit, but I'm more excited about what's more practical. Will we have more augmented type gaming, or will it be gimmicky? As we've seen sometimes things are just gimmicky. But I mean, as it's been proven for decades now, just a controller and a TV screen seems to work. That is the future of gaming, and it's been the past. It'll probably be the future. So it'll be interesting to see.
By the way, you got to check it out. And to the nation out there, the nation listening to us now, look, you got to look it up too. Check out the YouTube video of the Video Game Museum in Texas. One of the cool things that they have is they set up a recreation of a living room in like 1980, and it has all the video games from 1980. It's really cool. So check it out. And Micah, I'm happy to say this, but I think we solved nostalgia. I think we actually answered the question, right? Sort of what game is the best, or what console is the best console of all time. Micah, we did it. We solved it. We answered the question.
Great. Hopefully somebody will come out there and say, no, you didn't, because I still have these all nostalgia pains and I don't know what to do with them. And we'll try to help you out with it, okay? We will do our best.
Nostalgia pains are like geriatric pains. You know what I mean? It's just old people pains. Let's close this thing out, Micah. Look, obviously we're coming up on a fresh week, a brand new week, right? So what do you have planned for this week? What do you got going on?
So this week, a little bit more Miles Morales. So, just give a little bit of insight. One of the things we want to do with the PlayNation podcast is be able to have more chances to connect with friends, family, fans, what have you. So I am planning on being able to do trophy cleanup up until a certain point. And then my goal is to actually do a little bit of an event wherein I'll be swinging through the landscape of Manhattan while at the same time talking about, what I loved about Miles Morales, streaming the game, and then at a certain point going to get the final platinum trophy, which will be a little bit of a secret up until the time of the event. And then just making that just a little bit of fun event, one of our first events, unless you get the next platinum trophy and want to stream before me. But that's probably one of the gaming things I got going on. In addition to that, getting through the week, honestly. So it's just one of those things of like every Monday we do a sprint review, and it's just like, what are you working on? And I'm like, I don't even know what I'm working on, So it's just kind of this thing of like the work-life balance. And you want to talk about nostalgia. I like the kids go back to school. We decided that, they're going to actually go back to school. It's going to be good for them to go back 2 days a week because it is very difficult to be able to do schoolwork at home and be able to pay attention at the same time. So, and I started getting these nostalgia pains of just being able to work at work.
Right.
This working at home stuff is great up until a certain extent, but man, it is isolating. It really is. It's nice to be able to work with other people, have them looking over your shoulder once in a while, and just having that accountability, right? I'm not saying that I'm wasting time while working, but it's just one of those things that I just miss being able to have work be work and home be home. Melding them together I have nostalgia for the old way of living. So same thing I've always been looking forward to in 2020 is a return to normal. Looking forward to it. Leah's going to be getting her vaccine for work. So if people don't know, my wife, she's a nurse. So she's going to be going through the Moderna vaccine in the next couple weeks, I want to say. So hopefully that is a non-starter event. Nothing major happens there, which so far I've read a lot of stories that nothing does. So very excited to be able to see that nothing does happen with her either. And yeah, just keep it on, How about you, Joe? What's your week like?
It's one of those things, just to touch on what you were saying, right? So it's like work and home, very similar. It's like cheeseburgers and cheesecake, right? Individually very great things, but really don't belong next to each other or in the same meal, right? It's just not, they're two separate, they're great for their own individual things. But no, look, to talk about the streaming, right? So obviously, look, I'm in a rare situation right now. I am actually nowhere near a platinum trophy, right? I'm not within sniffing distance of a platinum trophy, which, look, listeners, if you know Joe Quinn, right, platinum trophy hunter extraordinaire, look, this is a rare state to be in. I'm not near a platinum trophy because I've been so consumed with the Division 2. I've been playing it nonstop. I was thinking about, in terms of streaming, right? So I was thinking about doing sort of the Division 2, just sort of stream, play along, and ultimately show off all my different loadouts and all that stuff. That could be fun. But ultimately, Micah, I think, look, I'm excited to watch you go through this platinum trophy and get that. I'll be there. I'll be watching with bells on. That'll be very exciting. And so, yeah, this week is going to be, it's like back to, get through the week, back to work and all of that. This week is going to be, I think it's going to be a pretty standard week. I'm excited for some of these games that are coming out, but I'll be honest, it feels like right now, I'm just kind of playing through the greatest hits, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, I'm feeling the same way. Red Dead Redemption, doing dailies, definitely going through Miles Morales, and I think I'm going to go back to The Last of Us Part 2 once I'm done with that. So
but that's
why that'll be the next one.
But that's why I was so excited for this episode, because honestly, when I think of gaming as of right now, today, right, I'm just really drooling for the next month. I think March and April are going to be really cool with all the games coming out. As we mentioned, It Takes Two, Returnal, and we're going to be covering these games extensively as they come out, because this is going to be an exciting year in terms of PS5 releases, in terms of next-gen releases. So much excitement moving forward. Micah, I think we did it. I think we 600% more episodes. I think we've done it.
Episode 6 is in the can. Just edit it, cut it, release it. You'll be listening to us on Wednesday.
Drop it, right? So you'll be listening on Wednesday. That sounds good. To the nation, PlayNation, take care of yourselves. Have a great week. Good day.